right, well, thank you all so much for joining us for Walking Hadrian's Wall, the Roman Frontier in England. The Hadrian's Wall was begun in 122 AD to divide Britain. It was the frontier separating the Roman Empire from the barbarians. So this morning, we're going to walk coast to coast with travel photographer Jack Holmes across what is now northern England. We're going to travel through animal pastures, over and along windy crags, through woodlands and lowlands and villages and cities for 90 miles from Wallsend on the North Sea to Bowness-on-Solway on the Irish Sea. So Jack here is the owner of Images from Near and Far, easy for me to say, at Western Avenue Studios in Lowell. He's a retired high school teacher who previously served as president of the Greater Lynn Photographic Association, as well as the gallery manager of the Loading Dock Gallery in Lowell. And Jack regularly gives armchair travel presentations to senior centers and libraries in the area. So all 85 of us or so, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jack for joining us this morning. And Jack, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert, and welcome all of you who tuned in. I appreciate that. As Robert said, I'm a traveling photographer. I've been so for some 6 decades or so. So off we go. We're going to hike into Roman Britain. My wife and I did this in 2016. But in 2003, we first were there. We were traveling in Scotland. And then heading south, we visited the central section of Hadrian's Wall, which is a border between the Romans and the Picts. And then we traveled down to York and then eventually over to northern Wales. In 2016, we returned to do some archaeological digging at a Roman supply fort near Newcastle, and then hike east to west, along Hadrian's Wall from from Newcastle to west of Carlisle. From Newcastle in 2003, we took the Hadrian's Wall bus AD 122 to the village of Once Brood and the hostel at Twice Brood. After checking in, we walked a bit on the nearby wall. It was okay to walk on the wall then at this section, but it's not recommended now. Whoops, he ran too fast. Here's a wall fort attached to the wall. The wall here along the crags. This area is near the Housted's Fort Museum, where a soldier ran past us as we were walking by. Next day, after hiking a bit, we headed to York. By the way, any photographs of me were taken by my wife, Meg, and a number of her photographs are in this. From Haltwhistle, we left by bus and went to Newcastle, and then by local train, we headed down to York. York was a staging fort for the wall. The Roman army had come to the island in 43 AD in the southwest. Then they were looking for tin and other raw materials for the empire's needs. They came to this area in 71 AD, and then worked here. We spent a few days in York before heading to Wales. In 304, Emperor Constantius and his son Constantine came to York. Constantius died here in 305. And breaking the succession rule, his son Constantine was crowned emperor in York in 306 AD. He later became known as Constantine the Great. He Christianized the Roman Empire, founded Constantinople, and actually moved the seat of the Roman Empire to there from Rome. Here's a bit of Roman ruin here in York. This area was controlled in 71 AD, but few remains of the Roman presence exist there now. In 2016, we were digging in South Shields, England. This is a reconstructed fort gate of Fort Abia. This was a large supply fort for the Roman Empire. It was on the North Sea. It was built in 160 on the top of a hill overlooking the River Tyne. Boatmen from Persia, cavalry from Iberia, and archers from Syria were all stationed here. There was a civilian village or a vicus outside of the fort walls in support of the fort. This city block sized area was partially excavated in the 1870s. And in the 1970s, all modern housing was removed from the site, and the Tyne and Wear Museum began archaeological work here. They partially excavated and reconstructed the original gate we see here. We were working with an NGO related group known as WallQuest, and they did the construction and the history work of this area and other places along the wall. They sponsored and directed our Earthwatch Project Dig. In early 2016 of June, we were digging outside the southwest corner of the fort's wall. Pits A and B were located on the edge of the village and the fort. A was at the edge of the vicus, and pit B was where the portion of the wall had collapsed into a boggy stream. Beginning of the dig season, so here we are opening up pit A near the modern street on the edge of the site. Pit B was further in from the street, and it was deeper and wetter and needed constant draining, pumping it out from where that boggy stream was. Work in pit B. I dug in pit B, and my wife was in pit A. Pit B had the first find of the season. It was a museum quality figurine of Ceres. Ceres was the Roman goddess of agriculture, hence our word cereal for breakfast. This is the figurine after it was cleaned and photographed in the lab. This thing is not especially large, but it was, as I said, a museum quality piece. Here I am digging in pit B with a couple other colleagues. My best find was a small bronze thing that looked a bit like a spoon, had a tiny hole in the middle of it. Nobody seemed to know what it really function was. My wife here in pit A, she's calling a find. Significant finds need to be location marked, and here we're using surveying equipment to mark the location of this. Her best find was a piece of Roman glass that could be dated, and so she got a finder's credit. I have a jar rim from pit B, and it belonged to a jar, something like this. It was in the museum. This blackware pottery was found at the very end of our dig time. We had reached the bottom of the assigned digging layer for our particular work project. Since it was located in 2 layers, the pottery had to remain in place for the next group to remove and to catalog. Ditches beside roads typically yield interesting artifacts, and sometimes latrines and dumps do as well, but fortunately we weren't working in a latrine or a dump. One morning when it was too wet to dig, we visited the reconstructed museum and reconstructed barracks. This particular flower was growing outside the barracks and collecting dew. hence Dewey is his name. The barracks from 200 AD. Arbia means Arabian. This referred to the Persian and Syrian soldiers that were primarily stationed here. Men captured by the Romans during their conquest were assigned as soldiers to a different part of the Roman Empire. If a captured person stayed in service to the Romans for some 25 years, they could become a Roman citizen with all the rights and privileges of a native Roman. Interior of some of the rooms in the barracks, dining area, sleeping area. These supply fort rooms were probably more refined than those that would have been found along the wall. This is the reconstructed commanding officer's villa. He lived here with his family, and it was certainly far more comfortable than the soldiers' barracks. Well documented. The fort village is now the city of South Shields. This is at the mouth of the River Tyne, which is way down here. At the top of the image here is the trains that will go to Newcastle. South Shields is at the end of the line. Guest house, where our Earthwatch team was staying. This whole section is bed and breakfasts and guest houses. And on the other side of the street were pubs, and then many food places, fish and chips, pizza, Pakistani and Bangladeshi curry choices were over there. This was growing outside our bed and breakfast in a little garden. When the digging was all done, it was time to begin our 10-day path walk. We took an early morning ferry from South Shields up into Wallsend. Wallsend and then Newcastle are in this region here on the North Sea. Hadrian's Wall runs from Wallsend, 90 miles or so, all the way over past Carlisle to Bowness-on-Solway, some 90 miles or so. Hadrian's Cycleway is 180 miles or so from near South Shields, then it goes all the way along, not always close to the wall, and then eventually down to a town called Ravensglass on the Irish Sea. Hadrian's Wall was a complex but standard construction. There were 80 these mile castles, 158 turrets, and they were spaced every third of a mile between the mile castles. The wall was built to control traffic and as a defense against the Picts in the north. Traffic that came through was monitored, and probably trade tolls were collected at the gates. About 10,000 troops manned the forts, the castles, mile castles, and the turrets along the wall. Mile castles like this probably had on the order of 10 to 20 soldiers, and the turrets had probably a third that. Military Road and the auxiliary forts are on the south side of the wall. Fort Arbia was one of these auxiliary forts, and Vindolanda we'll see a bit later as well. The wall itself was a standard design. The north side faced the Picts. There was a ditch by the wall. Sometimes this ditch was actually a cliff along the crags. And then depending upon where the topography allowed, the military road might be quite a bit separate from the wall, along with the North Mound and the Vallum. Wall followed the topography of the land as it went from across northern England. Secundum was the eastern end of Hadrian's Wall. It's now known as Wallsend, and it begins our eastern third. The outer wall of Secundum here is in the front yard of this row house. And the modern remains of the wall and its complex are barely visible in the urban landscape as we move through. And sometimes it's kind of gritty. It's not unsafe by any stretch, but it's not especially pleasant landscape necessarily. It's a segment of the wall near the road, and there's a betting sign because we were there during the 2016 soccer tournament, World Cup, a side creek here of the River Tyne near Newcastle. We had a guidebook that was given to us by the director of the Fort Arbia dig. He actually followed the actual wall through the urban landscape. Most of the walkers on the scenic path will follow the River Tyne, and there are all kinds of books out there which do a nice job of identifying what the passage is. The section that we took, it's probably difficult to find that book. Most people go along the River Tyne, much more scenic. Ponsalius was what Newcastle used to be known as. And this was the entrance into that space, into what is now Victorian Newcastle. Hikers on the Tyne path would see these bridges which over the River Tyne. If you watch Vera on PBS, you'd recognize those. There's the Great Northern Museum at the University of Newcastle. It's a treasure of Roman artifacts and mile castle models and turret models. Worth a visit if you can be there. Across from the train station in downtown Newcastle, these workmen are lunching at the monument to Hadrian and Constantus. Stay number one was at Keelsman's Lodge and the Big Lamp Brewery in Newburn. Our first walk day had been from Wallsend to downtown Newcastle. Then we had to take a local bus 4 miles out of town to this place. Originally, we were to have stayed at a hotel near the Secundum in Wallsend, but they unexpectedly closed just a couple weeks before we were to be there. And so with some switching of spaces, we wound up at this place, lovely place, but it did require some commuting from the city on city buses. My wife had researched the logistics of the wall. She chose a local company that customized your walk, and they did a fine job of finding the substitute lodging at last minute notice. These companies, not just this one, but all of them, you choose the dates and the kind of lodgings that you're looking for. And the lodgings range from campgrounds to hostels to guest houses, bed and breakfasts, hotels, or any combination of those. And the company would move your baggage from one lodging to the next during the day while you were doing gentleman hiking. My wife chose these places because they always had a breakfast, and some of the more remote ones had supper available, and we always had lunch on the road. We passed Big Lamp Hill here on the way to and from our commuting bus back to Newcastle. A lot of the scenery is like that. The wall path west of Newcastle was in suburban neighborhoods. This was a temple site that was located near some homes. Temples are not especially big, by the way. It was a turret site that would have been located in this space. Now all that's left is a piece of the wall. Some more sections of the wall and some identification of what was here. This stuff was all beside a lupine garden in one of the homes nearby. Oh, it's lunchtime. So we stopped here at the Engine Inn for a Sunday brunch, a quick one. Didn't want to be too late. Whoops, I forgot to show you what we were eating. Arugula and cheese sandwich. And this is leek and potato soup my wife was having. We probably had some English strongbow cider as well. Walking on, biking is quite common in England and on the continent. This is a Sunday, so it was rather a lot of them out there. I couldn't pass up this grab shot. I loved the way his head talked about diamond clean. We walked down neighborhood streets here, past the aged miner's home on Hexham Road, and then into a bit more rural spaces. There's a segment of the wall exposed as near the regular road up here. And this approached a farm that was situated along the row. This couple was talking to the horse, and we exchanged cheers as we passed each other by along the segment of the wall. This traveler here was not going anywhere near as fast, so we never saw him again. All the way along, signage was pretty good, identifying where you were and what the parts were. Sometimes these signs got a little bit messed up. The family cart out here on a Sunday trot. As we passed by, I found a horseshoe in the road, but it was heavy, and so I was not about to carry it, so I left it for somebody else. Night number 2 at Houghton North Farm, heading on the Wall. Lodgings may not be on the Wall path, and this one was about a mile out of town. Since Meg knew that they didn't serve dinner, we ate a nice evening meal in town late Sunday afternoon before mile walking here. The place was beginning to fill up because there was an English World Cup soccer match on the telly in the evening. This is our hostel at the farm, and this toilet seat had embedded barbed wire, but it was embedded in the acrylic, so it was not uncomfortable. It looked threatening, but it was not uncomfortable. Next day, we're on the road again. The route is rural here, off and along the road, which would have been the military road, actually. So here we have some grain, and moving between pastures and spaces, there are gates and ladders. These ladders are called stiles, and they move you through the landscape, past sheep. Markings here identify who the owner of the sheep is. Cattle, watch your step. You always have to watch your step when you're moving along this. Dandelions. This is why you don't cut dandelions, because it's fodder for bees. We met a solo college student here who asked if this was the Wall path. She was using 2 days to run 60 miles between Newcastle and Carlisle. Wow, good luck. We were going much slower because we wanted to smell the roses. Walk down by these homes on the old military road, now sometimes through pastures. And it's often it gets a little bit wet in some of these spaces. Lunchtime, but now Monday, this place was closed on Mondays, so we couldn't eat inside, so instead we had to eat on the picnic table outside. Now we're on our way again. Scenery on this typically quite lovely. As we move through pastures, sometimes a little on the wet side, muddy possibly. Past homes with sheep in the yard. over stiles, through more fields. These are finger posts, they're called. They have the mileage and the directions that you should be going. Note the acorn on the signs. This is the trail marker. Another ladder style heading into another field. Well, this field was beginning to get some views, and then down the end of the field was a piece of the wall. Now we're beginning to see more of the wall pieces exposed. Buttercups growing by the wall here. As arranged, we telephoned Greencart's farm from another town. This was about 2 miles off the trail, so they picked us up here and then delivered us back the next day in town. Stayed night number 3 here. We had met a couple earlier at the previous night. They were from an English couple from Exeter. She was a teacher who was not for Brexit, and he was a policeman who was for Brexit. The next day was going to be the vote, and don't ask him who he's voting for. Walpath bus, AD 122. It's driving on the military road here between Carlisle and Newcastle. We used an older version of this bus in 2003. We were stopping here at Chester's Roman Fort. This is an excellent museum and horse farm. Well worth the couple hours of visit if you can get here. Very convenient to the path. Chester's was called Salernum at that time, and it was a cavalry fort. It was built in 123 AD in a beautiful setting. This beautiful setting is along the river North Tyne. Calm. Apparently there's nice fly fishing on the river here, although this fellow was probably looking at his phone. Salernum, well excavated and foundations preserved, well described, laid out. You often wondered what the rest of the construction would have been like now that we just have the ruins here. This is a well-preserved bathhouse. Most all these spaces had a bathhouse. This is near the river. And right down in here is where the furnace was, where they heated the water that went into the bathhouses. Changing hall back here. There wouldn't have been grass inside the bathhouse at that particular time, obviously. Well documented and explained. These are changing lockers, if you will. Bathhouse, steam rooms. Again, what was the top of this like? This is the strong room. Stairs to the strong room where the money was kept. You can't go in there. And the famous penis tile. All of the guidebooks identify that. They don't tell you about the poppy, but they do tell you about the tile. The Clayton Museum on site. The gentleman who found this place exposed all of these things. This museum holds artifacts like the kind we found in Arbia, window glass and pottery shards. Off we go again. Black carts, turret. This is near the beginning of the middle third of the wall. Much more of the remains of the wall are in view here. Information signs were obviously quite well done, weathered to be sure. The vallum. and the mound on either side. These features ran pretty much the length of the wall. In some parts of the extreme east and west, they're silted up or have disappeared, but in the middle third, they're really quite recognizable. Fellow hikers use my camera for our photo, and we use their camera for their photo. So it's sometimes interesting. Sheep here in the vallum. Yeah, we saw a lot of sheep. Then a lucky break. The Cawbridge Coffee Company was parked in this space. It was parked near a Mithras temple. Temples we saw before in near Newcastle, they're not especially large. Mithras was a sun god. This temple was at Cowraburg. Again, not very large. It had 3 altars inside. The middle altar had offerings of a modern variety. The Romans really did not care who you worshipped, as long as you venerated the emperor. I don't know if this is an emperor or not, but whatever, it lost its head. And off we go, past some marshmallows growing in the boggy bit. Up the hill, back along the path, through more pastures. This one had some cows in it, and then we're going past a turret with barracks. Wall out here and the turret here. This probably would have billeted maybe 3, maybe 4 soldiers. Here we're walking on the mound beside the vellum. And finally we get to the old repeater station at Grindon with Les for night number 4. Repeater stations like this boost the telephone signals over the long distances. Next day, Sowing Shields Farm was across the street from the old repeater station, and we're off again. Here we're on the wall at Sowing Shields Crag with the old repeater station here in the far distance. We'll go back there for a second. Wall follows the crag all the way along. This particular section is known as the Wind Shield. And it's the crags have their own name, but this wind shield, steep sides face the north, and it stretches along much of the middle third. Mile Castle here, long attached to the wall. And this one had a very badly weathered sign. You kind of hope that these will get replaced. Along the crags. They can get kind of up and downish along these things. Local ram watching us as we walk by. And you always had to watch your step when you were walking in these pastures. The wall winds along the landscape, along the windsill. Each of these crags might have had their own name. Along the crag tops. This particular section over here is a destination, short term, but first we have to walk past some more sheep. The military road would have been down way farther away from the road, from the wall here, because it's so steep. There's the destination. We're heading towards Housted's Fort. This is the best fort on the wall. We were here in 2003 for some time. This is built in 124 AD, soon after the wall was started in 122. Again, documentation, quite nice. Meg is carrying Hadrian's wall passport. She stopped here so it could be stamped. I found a shoe, studs like this. These shoe studs lengthen the life of these soles of shoes. Meg found glass like this at Arbia. Food storage, this would have been a storage for grain. Keep it up, to keep it dry and dried and away from the animals. Here some new troops are arriving, greeted by the centurion, and they're being outfitted for their training. Going to be trained, they're all ready to go, they're in line. Line advance. One guy is kind of on his own and probably could stand a little discipline. Okay. Housestead's behind us, we're advancing past these locals out for a walk near the wall with their dogs. Heather on the wall stones, along the craggy wall. Sometimes the path was on the Pict side, and sometimes it could be on the Roman side. Here there's a lake far below the cliff. This is called Crag Loch. And this particular section enters into the southern side of the Northumberland National Park. And here the famous tree at Sycamore Gap, supposedly one of the most photographed trees in England. This was the opening scene in Kevin Costner's 1991 movie, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Robin was in the tree and he saw the horde coming up the back of the side here and chasing down his men. This would have been the Sheriff Nottingham's people, wouldn't have been the Picts. Stairs at Pell Crag. Once Brood village was at the bottom of this crag. Vindolanda, private dig and museum. Applications to be a volunteer at this dig begin in September of the preceding year, and they usually fill up by the end of the month. We arrived that particular day at the end of the workday, so we didn't see anybody working. In the museum, there's a model of Vindolanda. There's the fort and the vicus that would have served the fort. This would have been part of the vicus. Vindolanda was an important auxiliary fort guarding the military road. These would have well-defined buildings would have been part of the Roman fort. 9 forts were built on top of and with each other between 85 and 365 AD. Here's a reconstructed turret and the barracks. Again, probably a handful of people, the soldiers would have been there. There's a Roman temple in the museum garden. This was built by locals in the 1880s. Night number 5 was an upscale Hunter's Crook bed and breakfast, a restaurant near Vindolanda. They picked us up at Vindolanda and drove us to the bed and breakfast. Next day they drove us up to access the wall again. We're on Winch Hills Crag. We walked here in 2003. And this is the marker on top of Steel Rig, which is the highest point on the wall. At the marker of Steel Rig for the highest point, I expected to find a steel tower, but only found the marker. The word rig is a Scottish term for ridge. These folks were on the wall with us. Here's Meg as we pan in the direction that we'll be going. While we're there, a shepherd came up. Shepherd on a 3-wheeler or an ATV, ready to do some work, bringing back the sheep. And off we go along the craggy wall again. Wall in this section was a narrow wall. Make stopping here for photo ops of flowers. Farms in the countryside actually come quite close to the wall here, and the military road would be down here. There are horse farms quite close to the wall. Lovely horses. This one posed for me for a portrait. I don't normally do portraits, but this one posed. Wall here is on the narrow side. The paths are up and down. So if you're walking this wall path, it makes sense to do a little bit of training before you actually begin the walk. Mile Castle 42 at Caulfield Crag and the quarry pond in the distance here. I found a fat wallet on the ground. It had papers, documents, and 300 pounds in it. It belonged to Susan, but there was no one here. So I put it in my pack and intended to deliver it to the next official place or police station along the wall. Here's the quarry pond, Caulfield Crag, and steel rig here in the distance. And more locals near the trail. More stiles, pastures, past homes, farms, and a turret on the wall. Farms here are really quite nice looking. They look quite well to do. Here we're leaving a cattle pasture. You pay attention to the signage. They recommend that you don't bring dogs in this section. So we're entering a sheep pasture. Sheep are not known to be unfriendly, like sometimes cattle could be. We never had any problems with the animals. Along the trail, I asked everyone if Susan was there. At Walltown Crag, there were two older women sitting and resting. I asked her where she was from, and when I asked, she responded to Susan. She correctly responded she was from Calgary, Canada. I asked if she'd lost anything. It was then she noticed her wallet was not in her jacket pocket. She was very grateful for its return, and I was grateful to have given it to her and not being carrying it. So we're on our way again, past another turret. Along the wall, boy, is I glad that we found Susan. The wall in this section is at its maximum height and width. The wall comes in a couple sides. This is a 15 stone course wall, 11 above the ground, 4 underground. We met Susan again here at the Roman Army Museum. She bought us a pot of tea and some scones. Very nice. Roman Army Museum at Walltown is really quite good. If you're in this region, I recommend you stop here. It's informative. It marks the end of the middle third of the wall. I think the middle third is the best section of the wall for its Roman part. Night number 6 at Bridge House, Caulfield. This is the wildlife that we saw while we were on the trail. Next day, we're back on the path. Another narrow wall section here. There are stone walls of a couple basic dimensions, narrow and wide, depending upon availability of limestone that the wall is made of, and other considerations. In the coastal sections where stones were hard to find, the wall was timber and turf. Thirlwell Castle near Greenhead. This is actually not a Roman castle. It's in fact was built in 1369 with 1,000-year-old Roman stones that were taken from the wall nearby. So the wall is no longer there. Well, yes, it is. Interesting architecture in this thing. Very interesting architecture. Roman stones in a 14th century wall. Common and lovely foxglove is poisonous. It's what they get digitalis, heart medicine, from. This particular getting cold and damp, and this looked a little bit like, yeah, you remember. Now it's cold and rainy. Meg's got her poncho on. This is the vallum with the puddle in it. We're walking on the mound. Windy and cold, uncomfortable, but you have to move on. Here we go past the farmer's wall. And we arrive at Gilsand for a warm and dry stop at House of Meg tea rooms. Weather. What's the weather today? Well, kind of wet. Yeah, wet. I had failed to bring my rain pants this day, so my bottom half was getting wet. Mile 49, there was a Roman mile castle and turret here at Bird's-o-Wald. In the mid-1800s, they were taken apart to build this manor house, and the walls were covered with stucco, the original wall stones that were taken away. More weather coming. I'm definitely gonna get wet. I had a rain jacket on, but my rain pants were still at the next night's stop. So my regular pants got soaked. Meg, more thoughtful, had her poncho. Virga, rain on the horizon. Yeah, we got wet. We had a couple rainstorms that would last for an hour, and sometimes the rain would scuttle on by before or after us. Chilly that day and wet. Boots were getting really squishy. Finally, it did kind of stop, and we could see it scudding along away from us. Here we passed an honesty box. Beverages and snacks are for sale here, and you leave your money, then you take what you're looking for. Particular pasture was loaded with water from the recent rainstorm that we had to walk through. This is part of the cycleway. The Hadrian cycle path coincides with the walking path here. And then we finally got a rainbow, raining off in the distance, but we had a rainbow here at Sandsike Farm Bed and Breakfast in Walton for night number 7. We took off our boots and stuffed them with newspapers, looked at the dining room for dinner and for breakfast, where we would be the next day. Walked around the farm a little bit while our boots were drying out with the newspaper stuffed in them. Pants were drying out too. Next morning, fed and satisfied and dry, well, off we go. It's often sunny in the morning and then not so much later on. We're 8.5 miles from Carlisle as we're on the military road here. Even the animals don't eat this foxglove. So you see a lot along the wall. There's a kissing gate. As you leave the road, one person at a time goes through the gate. Notice the acorn markings. As we get to another honesty box, Must be snack time for me. Oh, full in the field. This path is becoming somewhat unattractive, not like we were seeing earlier. We're approaching Carlisle. These folks are at a park here and they're going to be doing some kayaking. And we walk along the road a little bit while these folks are out for a Saturday spin. This was in Carlisle. There's a tunnel went underneath the roadway because it was really a high-speed road. Night number 8, Marlborough House, Carlisle. By the way, football is soccer in England. And so after 15 miles of walking, I'm chilling with World Cup soccer on TV as Spain defeats some other losing team. I don't know who they were. Carlisle begins our last leg. This is the train station, which we'll eventually return to in a couple days' time. We walk again through this city. Not too much different from Newcastle, actually. Past the Carlisle Castle. Obviously not a Roman castle. There's a height marker for the previous year's flood. We had a lot of diversions because of the flood affected some of the path. And this McVitie's biscuit plant was almost wiped out by the flood. Meg carries McVitie's ginger nuts in her pack and sometimes gets stopped at airports, TSAs with them, security. Now it's pretty much always cloudy as we get away from Carlisle and not very attractive. There's a raven's wing. I don't know where the rest of the raven was. But there was just a wing. That was it. Power lines, smaller pastures and fields. Beaumont, here a bicycle for 2. They're obviously not camping like the other fellow was. Hadrian's Wellpath and the cycleway coincided as we passed St. Martin's Church. St. Martin's Church was not open the day that when we happened to be there, but had a kind of an interesting photographic little cemetery and garden here. And off we go again. Got a little bit sunny as we pass through this kissing gate. A heart petal on the path from some flowers. More pasture. A lot of cattle in this section. This sign says we are 7.5 miles from Bowness. But first, lunch at the Greyhound Inn. We had to eat outside because inside was packed with locals who were there for Sunday dinner and a World Cup game on the television. Onward after lunch, onward we go. A little sunny at the present time. And we paused on the roadside to do a selfie in a mirror beside a driveway. And then the drizzle came back, kind of cold. We're approaching the Firth of Solway. Get some sheep out here on the pasture, in the salt marsh. This is lowland along this particular road, and we're on the road now. And it is at very, very high tides, king tides, it's floodable. And when the water reaches here, it's about 3 feet deep out here on the road. So you don't want to be driving or walking. I have to get on the other side of the road because I'm on the wrong side for traffic. Solway, Firth. We're at low tide here. Port Carlisle. A local entrepreneur erects the signpost every day. Distances. He chats you up as he passes. He asks you where you're from, chats with you a little bit, offers to take your photo. If you agree, then he looks up the city that you come from and the distance in his notebook, and he takes the old ones down and puts up the new ones to tell you where things are. Your photo costs £1 a piece. Well, Meg had £1. I had some bills, and I could scrape together 86 pence. So he said, that's good enough. That's good enough. Have a good time. And so we're off again. It's raining again. Now it's raining. This biker is on his cycle way from Bowness. Bowness is up ahead. Onward. I am getting soaked because I don't have my rain pants on again. So I'm not going to have to wash my pants. As we're at the end of our 10-day path walk, Meg is here stamping the last page of the passport. Where's the passport? I had a passport here a moment ago. Here it is, Hadrian's Wall passport. Most hikers go west-east with the weather at their backs. So we had to go the opposite way because we were digging in South Shields first. There's a picture of the inside of a stamped passport. Has a little map, but there are other maps which are much better. Last night, Old Chapel bed and breakfast, Bowness-on-Solway. But the last stop was actually King's Cross. Go to King's Cross for celebratory pints and Solway salmon. Then we met some of the people we'd seen on the track, on the path. Next day, we have a sunny day, sunny in the morning, pretty much always sunny in the morning. Gets cloudy later on. Walk about town, a little bit of photography. And then we get to the end of the trail in Bowness. With food and lodging, we walked about 90 miles with these diversions. Thanks for tuning in and walking Hadrian's Wall path with me. If you have any comments and questions, I can answer them now. I can be reached at email at jackholmes@yahoo.com. Or if you're in Lowell, you can stop by my studio at 122 Weston Avenue in Lowell, number 377. I'm also on Facebook as Images from Near and Far, where you can see some more recent photography. Robert, welcome back.
All right, Jack, wonderful job as always.
Thank you.
So folks, we'll take roughly 10 minutes of questions here. Maxine wants to know, was that barbed wire inside the toilet seat? Why would this neighborhood area choose this design? This was back about a half hour ago. Yeah.
This was a farm, a working farm, and they thought it was funny. The lady in the farm said, "Oh, it's a joke," but it was embedded in the clear plastic of the toilet seat. So it was funny.
Donnie asks, who cuts the grass and maintains the walking paths?
That's a good question, and I don't have a good answer for it. It seems like part of it is trod, and other parts of it that might go through somebody's pasture or field, they might run a cutting machine along it to keep it down. I think that's probably the best answer, but I don't know if there is a particular person or group that's responsible for that.
Mary asks, what were the vellum and the north and south mounds used for? What were their purposes?
I don't know. It was on the south side of the wall. So the only thing I could figure out or read about was that if they thought the wall was going to be breached or it came across at any particular time, then invaders would then have to go up and down through this defensive thing. Some people, historians thought the vallum might have been dug and the mounds might have been dug prior to the wall. Others say, no, it wasn't. So I'm not sure there was a good answer for that at the present time.
Vivian asks, are we looking at the foundations of the wall and the rest of the wall is fallen? Or are we looking at the top of the wall and the rest is buried?
Most of what you're seeing is above ground, top of the wall. And it could have gone as high as they say as some 15 feet above the ground level. And there might have been some 3 or 4 feet underground. A lot of the stones were removed by folks after the Romans left and used in construction. For example, we saw at that castle and then at Birdserwald. So a lot of these stones would have been removed for local consumption after the Romans left. The highest part was about 15 feet, they expect, and it was probably as much as 10 feet on the wide side, and the narrow side was probably about 7 or 8 feet wide. A lot of
Patricia,
stone.
a lot of stone, yeah. Patricia asks, were all the stones used in construction from local sources, or were they brought in from elsewhere?
No, that's pretty much all locally sourced limestone. Limestone suggests that this at one point was underwater, ocean water. When I referred to the sill earlier, that is igneous, and it's a horizontal intrusion in the geology. Eventually, the limestone above it or whatever was above it got eroded away. But the stone itself, all was local. And sometimes if the crags were difficult to work, they might build a narrow wall there. In other parts, it would be a wide wall. And then on the far western side near Carlisle, where the stone was really tough to get, they used timber and turf to establish a wall there.
Joyce says, how far did you walk each day?
It varied. We chose to go somewhat slowly so that we could visit places like Chester's and Vindelander and the Roman Museum. So we never walked more than 15 miles, although there were some folks who chose to do this hike in say 6 days. So now you definitely have got to be doing 15 miles a day. Near Carlisle, we did a 15-mile day, but mostly I think the next highest was like 12 miles. Sometimes it was 8 or 10.
So Lisa and Donnie both would like to know, what time of the year did you take this trip? And Heather would like to know, what time of the year do you recommend walking the wall?
That's a good question about recommending. We were hiking it after South Shields, so we were in late June. In late June, it can be kind of chilly and damp. I don't know what the weather would be like otherwise. I would recommend looking at a guidebook about when the best time to be there is, but you do need to be sure that you're going to be carrying rain gear with you all the time, even if you send your kit ahead with a tour company. I did not do that a couple days and got very wet below my rain jacket. So I would recommend looking at a guidebook to see what the best time is. Certainly summer, not much earlier than June because it's going to be wet and cold. Maybe fall.
And sorry if you answered this, Jeff, but Judith wants to know, how long did it take you and Meg to complete the walk?
We walked, we had 9 nights of stays. And so we walked 9 days. and then the last day a little bit in Bowness. So we are basically 10 days. Yeah, 10 days.
All right, let me jump over to the chat. Frank says, fascinating presentation. June says, weren't you the one who told us about the Donna Leone book set in Venice? Thank you. I'm up to the 17th or 18th one so far, and I'm really enjoying them. Donnie says, thank you very much for an entertaining and interesting presentation. Looks like a really fun adventure. Maxine says, I really enjoyed this webinar. Beautiful photography, despite the crummy weather at times. Jane says, thank you. Very much enjoyed the trip, as well as your photos and your dry humor. We already answered Mary's question, already answered Lois's question, already answered Cindy's question. Lois also asks, how high was the wall originally? And was the wall meant for defensive purposes?
At highest, they suggest it was probably 15 feet. We saw one person who had his arm extended. So that would probably be 8 feet. And there was ragged bits on the top of where he was. So that certainly would have been 10 feet anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, but one writer suggested it could have been as high as 15 feet, although I don't think the narrow wall would have gotten that big.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other part of the question, Robert? I'm sorry.
What was the purpose of the wall? Was it meant to be defensive?
The purpose was certainly for defense against the Picts, but it also controlled traffic into and out of Roman Britain. And anybody who came through the wall certainly would be inspected. And if there was tolls to be collected for commerce, it certainly would have been done there. So it's probably defensive as well as commercial. And not to mention the fact that there was an pretty impressive construction that you're seeing there. So that definitely demonstrated the power of Rome, if you will.
So Mary wants to know, who are the Picts? When you say Picts, what do you mean?
The Picts, that's spelled P-I-C-T. That was a barbarian tribe that would have been north of the wall in what is now Scotland. There were some native tribes south of the wall, but the Romans had taken care of them pretty easily, and that they found the Picts to be problematic. The Romans did try and build an Antonian wall across the Firth of Forth, which was up in Scotland. It was there for about 2 decades and not well tended and not very well done. And so they eventually abandoned it, and they simply retrenched to Hadrian's wall and stayed there until they finally left in the end of the 4th century.
Heather, so we're going to start to wrap it up here, Jack. Heather asks, can you do camping along the wall? Are there any campsites?
There are campsites. I don't know where they are. We saw a person on a bicycle with a lot of kit, and I expect he was a camper. We did not see a lot of people who were carrying a lot of gear for camping, but you can. The tour companies that move kits around would certainly move things to campgrounds quite easily if that's what you were willing to do. So yeah, they're there. Good.
Ron says this looked like a beautiful hike. Patricia says, I love the photos, including the flora and fauna. Enjoyable presentation, gorgeous photos and commentary. Last question goes to Donnie. Where are you traveling to next? What is your next adventure?
Well, next, in about 3 weeks, we'll be heading to Southwest France. Jeff, the traveling librarian, was there in the Dordogne. So we're going to be looking at some different kinds of things that he was looking at. We'll be dealing with some wine and then some of the prehistoric caves near Lascaux. Then we'll go down to Toulouse and Carcassonne in the south. And
Great.
then we'll off to Portugal for a little bit, where I'm going to have a photographic exhibit in Portugal.
Well, Jack, enjoy France, enjoy Portugal. We'll miss you for a few weeks.
Yeah.
I want to thank you though. You did a great job as always. Folks, look for an email for me later today with the recording and the feedback survey. If you have any follow-up questions for Jack, his email address is on the screen. But I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks so much, Jack.
Thank you very much, Robert, and take care, everybody. See you again sometime soon.
All right, see you in a couple of months, Jack. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.